How does authenticity play into building connection?
Well, my feeling is that when the more real I can be with anyone in my, direct connection, the more chance there is for actual connection as opposed to fluff interactions. I look at small talk and the way that I can sit there and, have conversations about the weather and what I do for a living in very kind of surfacey ways. And what that typically gets me is interactions that kind of end there. Or that I don't feel interested in beyond that. And so I think the more I can bring, what's true for me, the deeper that connection can go, and then there's more there. It's a richer environment for more, yeah, more connection. It just keeps going further and further.
Um, can you define authenticity for yourself? You had said like showing up, in your truth. Is that the antithesis of authenticity for you?
I'm really realizing as you're asking me that, like, I have probably not spent as much time really kind of, defining it as one might think, given the nature of my business. For myself, though, it really does have to do with the whole concept of like your truth will set you free kind of thing. I've really learned that that is really so true for my own life. That, and it's not like, I think I used to think of that saying as like, oh, I'm harboring a secret, and so if I just, speak it, then it'll set me free. But it's actually like little things, like, ooh, this choice doesn't feel good, and I want to name that. Or like the way that situations that might ordinarily result in me feeling like shame coming up. Yeah, I'm just using shame as an example, but like anytime I name and like kind of name what's, put a voice to what's actually true for me, it, like, that to me is what authenticity is. And so I used to think it was like, oh, it means that I have to like break down and cry in front of people and then I'm being authentic. But actually the authentic thing is to say, wow, I'm feeling resistance to like breaking down emotionally because, whatever is true. So it's actually not about this like I have to be so vulnerable and so like, no, it's like what's actually real for me might be a resistance to that, or that I don't feel emotional, or, anything like that.
Thank you. The truth will set me free is such a good way of sort of summing it up, I think. Um, and I like that you mentioned vulnerability, like it's not being vulnerable and crying and but that it is an sort of being present with whatever is arising, with the friction, the resistance. I think of it a little bit as alignment. So like when we're in alignment, when we're feeling good and feel like life is flowing in a easy and effortless way. When we are out of alignment, we get that friction, and it's just authenticity, I think, is just noticing the friction. Not necessarily how you react to it, but just noticing it and honoring that friction is there.
Yeah, exactly. Like that might be what's true, as opposed to it being like, I think the perfectionist in me often thought that like there was a certain goal to get to. Oh, I'm supposed to be this, I'm supposed to be X, Y, or Z, as opposed to like, well, actually, I'm this other thing. Like an example that just came to mind as you were talking is like thinking about, being in a circle and going around taking turns sharing. And it might be like, oh, I have to think of something interesting to say, because we're all sharing this sentence prompt or something. And that the authenticity part is actually going, I want to think of something interesting to say. Like I have this judgment or desire that I'm supposed to be interesting right now. And it's like that's where the authenticity is not coming up with something really profound to say. But it's taken me as a person a while to kind of realize that. But it was such an aha moment of like, oh, who I am and what's going on for me is actually exactly as it's supposed to be. And the more I can welcome that and actually model being welcoming of that, it's kind of it spreads.
Yeah, I think that we need more models in the world of this because, as you said, we're like in a connection deficit. We're also in like an authenticity deficit. As you're talking, the question that came up to me is if mindfulness, as defined by many, but I generally use John Kabat-Zinn's definition of the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally to what's happening in the present moment. I think I added a couple extra words there, but that awareness and like just honoring that awareness and noticing what is authenticity. Like it's the same thing. I do a lot of stuff with law of attraction, which is where this idea of, I'm not the only place where the idea of alignment comes in. And I think that being in alignment, being in that flow state is just mindful awareness, authenticity. These are all the same thing that we talk about in our different packages and pretty bows on them, but they're all coming back to this root commonality. Would you agree? Or
I feel curious about that because I'm like I'm trying to wrap my head around it first, like just because I get, yeah, for some reason I'm having trouble seeing the connection between those two things directly, and that's not to say that there isn't one. I'm trying to think of examples of where like law of attraction stuff would relate directly to authenticity. Do you have a sense of like what that might look like?
So not the law of attraction in terms of I'm not specifically talking about the part of like what we're attracting and the frequency that we're attracting, but within the law of attraction, there's being in alignment with source energy, being in alignment with the energy that's running through us, the experience that we're having, which is, to me, it's the same as being in wise relationship to what's happening within us, being aware of what's happening within us. Law of attraction then has other elements, of like, what are you focusing on and what is the vibration or energy of that? Because you can still be like in alignment and in authenticity, but be at a lower vibration.
Yeah, I think I realized as you were talking just now, like where the discrepancy felt like it was in my head. Like my idea of law of attraction is kind of like choosing to, like you said, focus on certain things or kind of putting yourself in a higher vibration state or whatever, which doesn't seem unrelated to authenticity, but it kind of feels like authenticity is like whatever is here is what I'm like putting focus on or being present to. And whereas the other thing feels like, oh, I'm actually choosing to like put myself in this other state. Not to say that it's not authentic, but that it's like a choice to kind of go in one direction. And I may not have a full understanding of law of attraction too. I have like a very limited sense of it.
Well, you're not wrong in what you understand or what you've shared. There are the two part, there's the part of like, yes, choosing to look and focus and draw in those things, creating that emotional vibrational resonancy within yourself. Why it's important to choose to look at the things that we want and not, try to push away from the things that we don't want. But in all of that, where it all comes together is this alignment of what, like seeing what we're focusing on, being able to be present with yourself so that you can from then choose. Because if you're not on solid ground where you stand right now, you can't choose to go wherever you want. Like,
yeah, that I agree with that. In fact, this topic has been a real, like, very alive for me recently. Because I think I mentioned to you that I partook in the Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within weekend. And it just reminded me how much, or how little I should say, they focus on in that training on what's here now. And there's a lot of, like, I mean, I admire and really resonated with a lot of what they taught. But there was a missing piece for me, which was, can we welcome what's here now and then choose to go, I don't want to be here anymore, or I want something better. It was touched on so briefly that it was just, yeah, like I wonder what's lost with that without actually just like being with first and then making that choice to go, I want to take myself out of this state. Like, especially something like grief, like that's an example of something where it's like, to just jump it, like just jump around and you'll feel better. And it's like, whoa, grief is a thing that needs a little, I mean, and that's my opinion, right? Some people might not agree, but yeah, so that's kind of something that's been a lot on my mind, as far as like, what's the balance between choosing states and really just welcoming what the current truth is.
thank you. You had used the word or phrase of like trying to get out in or to a different state. And so like what came up for me was, yes, I think that is the damaging side of like being ultra positive. I think of the phrase always being, always becoming. Like we're always here in this moment. We are always being, but we're always becoming something else. So like balancing that, what is my experience in this moment and how am I perceiving it? What are the filters on it? But having an eye like of where we're going. Abraham Hicks, who is one of the people I follow a lot for Law of Attraction, talks about the car analogy. If we were driving somewhere and our windshield was below so we can always see where we are, we would run into shit all the time. But like we can't only have our eyes forward because we'll always be disappointed that we're never at where we're going. So like, how do you be and enjoy and experience here and now with that eye towards, this is what I'm cultivating. These are the seeds I'm planting. This is what I'm pulling in. So that feels different, like than the I want to say positive psychology, but it's not even that. Just the ultra positive of like, just focus on the good, just focus on the future. Without that, I think that's super important to have that element of, this is my experience right now. And I think that's the seeds of the work that you do, the seeds of the work I do. And then, that bit of, and what do we do with it? How are we, but it all starts from learning to be present with what is in our experience.
Yeah, totally. And I think the thing I've realized for myself is the more I welcome what's actually true, the quicker it shifts and moves anyway. Like, and especially for those more challenging feelings or challenging stuck places, so often I see now that what has me stuck there is the resistance to feeling the thing in the first place. Like if I'm feeling sad, I've caught myself going into a sad spiral of like sad and then like mad for feeling sad. And then, so now so the sad's still there, but it's getting pushed under, but then the mad is like, taking over and kind of creating this like loop that never ends. And what I found for myself is the more that I can actually, first of all, recognize that I'm sad in the first place, but then also to allow space for that and say like, wow, yeah, I'm feeling sad, and that's what's here, and kind of swimming in it, even maybe amplifying it if it's like needing some attention. It so often will dissipate, and then the next thing I know, I'm on to the next thing and feeling in a different space. And the same goes for relationships. And I think this is kind of where some of the authentic relating stuff that I teach and that people experience in the workshops, the more we can learn to accept one another in whatever states are true, the easier they will pass, kind of in relationship too. And I don't mean relationship as romantic necessarily, but just like within connection. Like if we can be with you in your anger and actually welcome it and be the space for it, it likely won't last nearly as long as if we fight back, and make it wrong or anything like that. And yeah, so it's I could go on about that because
Yeah.
I'm passionate about it. Needless to say.
I think being okay with our experience, whatever it is, and then having the space for other people to be okay in their experience in whatever it is without trying to change it or manipulate it or make it less painful for us because we're okay in our experience.
Well, yeah, and there's also, I think, the thing that gets tricky, I think, for people to wrap their head around is that and I'll just use the example of like you being angry. Like for me to accept your anger doesn't mean I have to agree with you. Doesn't mean that like what you're angry with, I have to be angry with too. But like for me to welcome you in, like, yeah, like, and even to empathize and to say like, yeah, I get why you're angry. I might not feel the same way. I might not have the same values and be angry at the same person or entity or whatever. And the other element there is that I might feel uncomfortable being in the presence of your anger. And maybe that's because of my past or just, my feelings toward anger. It's like, I don't, I'm not comfortable with myself being angry. So then how, that kind of thing. And so it's also the balance of like, can I be with my own discomfort at the same time as being with your anger? Like, I don't think anyone should be like, oh, whatever I feel, who cares? Let me welcome you and be, it's a balance. It's like, how can I take care of myself in my discomfort and also, be with what's true for you? And some of that's naming it. I feel really uncomfortable right now with your angry or with your anger. And like, I'm noticing a desire to like go in the other room and get away from it. And sometimes naming it will like diffuse it, because maybe that response is actually what softens you. And I'm not saying that it's like some exact formula that's like any angry person just tell them this magic pixie dust, but it really does have naming like what our truth is really has such a powerful potential of like releasing the pressure. It's like, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and then it's like, where did the elephant go? It's the exact thing.
Yeah. What's coming up for me is like the idea of emotions. Emotions are energy in motion. They're just an indicator, going back to that alignment. When we feel an emotion, it is just a indication that we're out of alignment. When we're in alignment is love, is like not bliss, happy, but just general everyday love, acceptance, being good with life, so when we feel those emotions, we're out of alignment. And what we do, I think, is try to hold on to that emotion, or like if it feels good, we want to continue to hold on to it. If it feels bad, we want to suppress it, which is still holding on to it, because in order to suppress it, you have to like keep it somewhere versus just letting these things flow through us. And or like if we can't in that moment, naming it. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing. And as you said, like with relationships, like being present to, I'm feeling uncomfortable with this right now. I'm uncomfortable with your anger, the example you used. And yeah, as soon as we name that, we put it out where you can't heal what you don't feel.
I was just thinking of how I used to handle my emotions, And it would be like that I'd go right up into my head and try to figure them out. Like rather than feeling them, accepting them, allowing them, there's like this way that I was like, I think what it was is feeling like I could tell something was happening, and then it would just go into like, let me overanalyze it to death until, and that would then create that same kind of spiral of just like staying in it. Because I wasn't actually being with the feeling, I was just like analyzing it.
Yeah. Um, I just listened to somebody, Bentino Macero. I've been listening to him for a while. He has a very different take on spirituality. It's a lot based off of the law of one, which is what most of our religion and then spirituality has been sort of come out of, but it's been very misconstrued. Anyway, talking about emotions, he said that like we have this idea that when we have an emotion, it's wrong to have that emotion. And so we do this process. We think about it, we analyze it, we try to fix it, and we try to change it. Rather than what's wrong is our thoughts about the emotion. And if we just accept that we have that emotion and change our thinking about it, because the thinking we can change. We can observe that we're thinking a thought and we can shift it. We can slowly choose easier feeling thoughts, or slowly just notice that we're thinking. And over time, the more we notice, we can begin to notice the space before the thought or after the thought and, slow that down. Yeah, it's that this thing of being human in our society and constantly being at war with ourselves because we have an emotion and that is wrong and we need to fix it. And then ripples out to others.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Louise Hay's book. I want to say it's called You Can Heal Your Heart. Um, all about grief. She talks about the grief of, both the death of someone, but also things like divorce and like things that are a little more like complicated to grieve over, like odd things, like maybe your ex-husband dies, who like people aren't expecting you to necessarily have grief over. But the thing that that book was so profound for me, like such a pivotal, moment for me to realize the relationship between thoughts and feelings. Because with grief, like basically what she teased apart in that book was like, here's actual grief, and here's how like you're making it even worse on yourself because of the thoughts that you're like, and it's kind of like that what that spiraling thing is, the like overthinking, attaching meaning to things, making things out to be actually like not so much about the grief. Because what I've learned from that, from that book, reading it multiple times, is like if we can actually like quiet those thoughts and like really be with the grief and be with like, wow, yeah, it hurts, this hurts, can I just let it hurt? Then like thoughts like, oh, I'll never find a love again, that's like magneted to, and to be able to like, kind of shave that away from what's really there, which is just pain, just, sadness, or whatever flavor of grief is kind of alive in that moment. Like that was such a huge moment for me, is kind of realizing, oh, I don't have to think these things, I can still grieve. And like, and actually it clears the way for grief, I think, to not put so much attention on those thoughts. Like to choose like, oh, there's that thought again of like, you know something that's really not, this is just my monkey brain wanting to like assign something to the feeling instead of just being with the feeling.
The thoughts coming up to me of like how, and we've sort of touched on this, but like how do thoughts get in the way of authenticity?
Yeah, I what comes up is like a lot, even though that's not a they come up a lot in the way of authenticity. Again, I'm getting that like example in my head of like being in a circle where people are taking turns sharing, and it's like when I imagine myself thinking about what I'm going to say, I'm not listening to what other people are saying, first of all. And then I'm also making my answer cerebral as opposed to just letting like bleh, letting it come out, what's actually true. There's a lot of truth, I think, that gets garbled up or like filtered by our brain. And the opinion I have is that our brain thinks, like it's trying to protect us, it's trying to do it like, oh, but it's like feels very limited compared to the rest of us, like our hearts and our souls. And so it's like, thanks for trying to help, but like, I got this. So I think that's kind of what tends to happen, is that when we get in our brain, not only are we less present with each other, like, I'm not listening to you if I'm too busy thinking like, what am I going to say next? But then also I'm not present for my own self. I'm like filtering myself through the lens of a monkey brain, as opposed to just like blurting out what's actually here. I mean, the one thing that we do very frequently in authentic relating, which I'm sure you're very, very well seasoned at, is like sentence starters or sentence stems. And one of the ways that can be really powerful is to just keep repeating it over and over again and kind of like letting stuff just fall out. And it's almost like journaling, where like you might be writing and writing, writing, and then there might be a point where, wait, I didn't like have a conscious thought that I was writing this. It just kind of came out. And that's kind of what can happen by like allowing, like taking away the thinking ahead, but just like letting it come out. It can really have a more, you know, surprising and also kind of clear output of what's actually in your heart. Not all the time, but like, it's possible.
Yeah. I think of like our brain is trying to protect us, totes. It's a computer with really bad programming. It's got lots of viruses.
It's a Commodore 64.
Yes. I mean, it's one of the most amazing computers on the planet, just with really faulty programming, domestication. And the quote, and I'm paraphrasing and I can't even remember whose quote it is, but the human ability to think is an amazing ability, but the ability to not think is even more powerful. To like be able to notice our thoughts and to be able to like choose to not focus on them and begin to like slow them down and have them not be there, so that we can be more present and have that full body wisdom from the heart and from the gut. And I like the idea of like the sentence stems, and that's a journaling exercise, and one that I give to many people of, just start by writing, like, one is like, I know for sure I feel good when. And it starts a little sort of thought and robotic, but as people get into it, like they get into the feeling of things that feel good and a deeper understanding and wisdom from their body of like, oh, this is what really resonates with me. I love the idea of sentence stems and getting out of the headiness. I love reading, I love intellectualizing, but like getting into the body is super powerful for connecting, I think.
Yeah, I think for me, and I imagine there's a lot of people that feel this way. There was so many years where I just like I thought I was my thoughts. Like that's what I identified as. And yeah, there is a real power, like you said, in like actually realizing you can choose to like attach to them or not. And so now I try to look at my brain as more of like a tool, just like, the other functions of my, like I have a hand and I can pick things up with it. I have a brain, I can figure things out with it. But like, do I have to use my hand all the time? Do I have to like, do what my hand wants to do all the time? No. Do I have to do what my brain wants to do all the time? No. I can notice it, and, I guess it's a weird example because that makes it sound like the hand has a mind of its own. That's a little creepy, but I think you get my drift.
Yeah, so you had said the witnessing word, which is like, the understanding that we are the witnesser of the thoughts and the emotions and the mind and the body and the hands, whatever they do. um, like we're not even taught like emotional intelligence, and we're not taught this idea that we are the witnesser, we are the experiencer of these things, and not the actual experience, like, yeah, not the experience, not the reaction, not the thoughts, not all of that, but we're just the calm, present, hopefully calm, present witnessing awareness of it all. I'm in the process of imagining a world where we're all taught that. Similar to if all children were taught at age 5 how to meditate, what a different world that might be. How do you envision your job being different in that world?
In a world where people were taught to meditate at
Yeah.
a young age,
Yeah.
gosh, I might not be in business. I mean, because what comes up is like the automatic ripple effect. I mean, I say that lovingly. That's what I want too for the world. I don't mean that like, well, then I'm sure I'd find some other way to serve the world. But I think of it being really akin to having a more authentic, way of life. If you're more in touch with your own self, how could you not be also in touch with kind of what's going on around you? So yeah, I mean that's really similar to you fantasizing about people being taught at a young age to meditate. I fantasized about people being taught at a young age to like communicate and to be in relationship. Like, how is it that we are taught earth science and trigonometry in school, but not how to relate in a way that's actually like, I mean, what we see is our parents and our friends modeling. And I don't know if you're anything like me, but I had a lot of unhealthy relational things modeled for me on a daily basis, and I think a lot of people are like that. So then what do? We know what we do, what we know, which is what we've learned from watching, and then we wonder why we're hurting and why things don't feel good. And that to me was like the point where I was like, wait, there has to be some other way of being like that, and so I'm thrilled that I feel like I found the answer. Like, not to make it sound like life is just a ball of bliss and but there really is this like core thing that didn't feel right, and it feels right now. And I want that for the world. I want that for everyone to feel like it, like, oh, I can actually, it's the version of I can get what I want, but it's not like, oh, anything I want I get. It's not like that, but it's like there's a way that I can get what I want, and that what I mean by that is like space for my truth. And that's kind of what it comes like. There's like an inner peace that's broad, because like I now can give myself space for truth, and I know how to give space for other people's truth, and that's what feels like pretty expansive and like a solid foundation to function on. And there's lots of not getting what I want other than that, but that's being human.
um I think that this getting what we want and connection, I believe that in seeking connection, we are ultimately seeking connection with another through to source, back to whatever you think source is, God, and just energy, the universe, Mother Nature. Our goal is to connect to that. And we can have a direct connection ourselves, but just as we are, little pieces of source experiencing itself through 7 or 8 billion different, well, more than that, that's only the human experiences of it. We want to connect through to somebody else. So that connection is feelings. I think that we get what we want when we focus, and this is a little bit of the law of attraction, and I'm finding this for myself, focusing on what is the feeling I'm trying to create and connect to, versus what does it look like? How does that thing show up? Am I connecting to, I want a Subaru Crosstrek? I do. But the feeling is that I want freedom. I want freedom for mobility. I want ease of travel. So as I want the Crosstrek to get out in nature more. So the feeling of connected to nature, I can get that without necessarily having the thing actually show up. And so I do think that we can get what we want when we understand why we want it. Like everything we want in the world, we want because we think that it will bring a particular feeling. And so I think that when we come into authenticity with ourself, I'm probably merging lots of things right now. Like I'm remembering the beginning of my question to you, and I definitely close up parentheses along the way. I'll get there. You had mentioned if we teach like you want every kid to be taught how to relate and communicate and connect. And like meditation goes along with that, like, because we have to relate to ourselves. Like we forget that is our primary relationship first. I say I'm polyamorous because I have to date myself. I have to spend time with myself. I have to love myself. And then from that understanding, if we have a good relationship with ourselves, we can have a good relationship with others. If we're authentic and true to our experience, that ripples out to others. And I think part of that is, as you said, recognizing the feeling that is present rather than the thought about those feelings. And so going back to feelings, we can get what we want when we focus on feelings.
I just had an analogy come up while you were sharing that. When you were talking about the importance of like connection to self and kind of like being in touch with your own world first, like the analogy that came up is like, it's like we all use cell phones to connect, or most of us do, right? So we can pick up our cell phone and we can call or like Snapchat or whatever, app of your choice to connect with someone else. But if our phone gets, dropped on the ground, not charged, like the screen gets cracked, it's like these are all ways that without care, our device for connection is now going to be like, if your screen's cracked, you might not be able to send a text because you can't read the screen. If it's not charged, you're not going to be able to do anything because it's not going to turn on. And so like, the metaphor is like, how do we charge our own self, right? How do we get in touch with like keeping our self in full quality so that we can connect with other people? And yeah, I just wanted to share that metaphor.
I like that metaphor. I've been using more of the computer, and maybe it goes with it, because like you can do lots of amazing things on your computer by itself, but if it's not connected to, if you're not connected, or your computer, to source, to the internet, I call it the virtual internet source. If you're not connected to that, then like you don't have this wealth of information. Like when we can't really connect to somebody else if we're not connected to our own source first, have our own connection into that internet. And then, yeah, if you have a device that you're not caring for, or this vehicle that we're in, it just popping up image wise is like all of the horrible foods and things that we do, and we overeat, we eat horrible food, we overwork and we praise that, and we demonize self-care. And
then we come home and pull right into our garages and don't interact with any other people outside of our, I mean, that's a little outdated of a an analogy since no one's leaving their homes in general. but yeah, that it's like there's ways that all the things that are nourishing, or at least that I've found are nourishing, I realize how far away they are from our cultural daily norm. I mean, even something silly like, and this is kind of diverting a bit from what we're talking about, but like when I think about why I get so challenged with drinking water, you know, I learned how much it's like a healthy amount of water for a person my size to drink, and I'm like, oh wow. Like I think about growing up in school, like they never encouraged people to drink water. Like we didn't have water bottles with us or like have trips to the water fountain. And so there's a way that like that's just one example of like a self-care thing that is not or at least wasn't, it might be now in current, you know, schooling, I'm not sure, but like the way that taking care of oneself isn't really focused on what's nourishing, like school lunches, kind of a whole, you know, similar thing, right? Meditation, emotional health, like all of these things are like, you know, out in our society are not, you know, ingrained. Like if you saw someone wailing in tears in public, my guess is that a lot of people might think, ooh, that, ooh, you know, let me stay away from like what's going on there. As opposed to like this person might be in deep grief. And like that's not accepted in our society to like be grieving in public. And so yeah, like these are, it's like these ways that it's actually taboo to have, like you said, it's kind of like demonizing self-care.
and um I think demonizing care in general, because in like the image of somebody, you know, grieving in the middle of the street, um, the act of looking away and like, oh, you know, whatever they're going through, I don't want to deal with that, versus like actually caring for somebody else as if they were a part of us. And it seems like for me, the struggle is real because there's a lot of grief out there. So like how to care for self and care for others without getting drained, how to let the connection to source move through me rather than, you know, giving my care, you know, mine, this is my reserve of care to this person versus like, you know, it's a practice to let this move through me. Because like going through the streets of Philadelphia, there's a lot of grief and sadness um, and people in need. So it feels overwhelming at times. And this, I think it's in part because there is such a push towards like just general lack of care or lack of care for other, um, that it seems one out of a million people is caring for somebody. Um, but just popping in is that Brene Brown said something about like moving in closer. You know, so when we get close to people, rather than this big picture, the world's horrible, nobody loves anybody, when you move in closer, you see the care, you see the thing, the same as like moving in closer to our actual experience and not the thoughts and the picture that creates, but like moving in to the micro, like what is really going on here? What am I experiencing it, and can I experience it in this moment and be okay with it?
Yeah, there's a very similar concept within authentic relating, which is leaning into connection. Like there's like a way that it may be a tendency or a choice at times to like disconnect, often because of discomfort or like, you know, patterns of like, oh, this becomes unsafe when this happens. And it's similar to kind of what we were talking about earlier. Like, can I be with my own discomfort? If you're angry and my tendency is to disconnect because I feel uncomfortable, it's like the invitation is to say, can you remain in connection and actually see it through the other side? See it, like be with it in whatever forms it is, which often in my experience, it's like it's a much richer experience on the other side than like when we disconnect and when we, you know, choose to leave. And I think that's kind of similar to what you're talking about, like when we have these like broad generalizations of like, oh, the world is, everyone's out to get, you know, everyone's out for themselves, and you know, it's a brutal world out there. And it's like, well, if we lean into like what's actually here and stick with the connection, then it really does have a way of proving its richness.
Yeah. Um, I think that I'm feeling into that, not thinking into that. Yeah, the big picture sometimes is too disconnected. You know, it's easy to separate from it. So, how do you see, or when do you see, like the ripple effect of the work that you're doing in Let's Be Authentic, and like how do you see that rippling out into society? Um, and I want to say, like, envision a world 25 years from now, and you have blossomed your business, and like you have so many, you have people in every state, every country doing this work. And you know, like I know that authentic relating and circling and these practices are out there. So how does this ripple out into the world in 25, 50 years? What does it look like? What do you desire, or like envision it?
Well, I heard a couple things in what you're asking, kind of like what would be what like what would the effect be, or what would the like kind of, and I think what comes up for me with that is like um I mean, my experience discovering authentic relating was like feeling the impact on my life of like I kind of said before, like, oh, there's like a different way to be, there's a different way to really kind of take charge, or get in the driver's seat of my life and in my relationships. And I imagine that others would have a similar kind of response, like when they see it, like, oh, maybe it's seeing it at different times. But when I imagine people coming to workshops or getting to experience authentic relating in one sense or another, that feeling will become so noticeable and so like desired that it's like, oh, how do I recreate that? It's like, it's just like a practice, right? It's similar to in meditation where you might notice that you're feeling a little more like even keel and more balanced. Well, how do I oh, I've been meditating. That's probably, you know, so it's kind of the same thing. Oh, I feel like my relationships are improving. Oh, I've been authentically relating and practicing that. And so I think it becomes infectious in the way that people like then show up different to their relationships and model showing up different for people in their lives. And then it's like a ripple effect that people will, you know, see that in other people and also feel that feeling of like, oh, that feels good to actually interact with them. I wonder why. And so the more, you know, inquiring and rippling and modeling and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I picture as far as the impact of it. But yeah, when I picture the perfect world in that sense, I'll leave it at like just like the authentic relating kind of connection sense, like having I'm picturing a world where it's just there's like a safety there that's not, that's kind of like implicit, as opposed to right now, which feels like the opposite. Like it's like my tendency has been to be, let me be guarded by default unless you prove to me that you know I can trust you and that you know you're safe. And so I picture a world where it's actually the opposite of like, you know, really open heartedness and like trusting and caring and all of these things. And hopefully not being proven wrong. But you know what I'm saying? Like rather than like having a need to like, I'm going to be guarded, be guarded, be guarded until you've proven me otherwise, like actually trust and show up shining with love. And it's it's a tricky thing when I say that out loud, because what I realize is that it could be a very slippery slope into like caretaking codependency if like I'm not like I don't have boundaries and I'm just going to love and do all the things and think that it's like actually me leading with my heart. But it's like there is a balance of that. Am I taking care of myself? Am I, you know, like you said, kind of like tending to my computer And then, making sure all my software is updated and, all that stuff. And then also kind of being in connection. But yeah, like really just being, operating from a place of feeling safety relationally with others and knowing how to speak our needs, knowing how to be in touch with our needs, knowing how to ask for what we want. Are we always going to get what we want? No, that's just not how life works. But can we put a voice to it and have a discussion and collaborate? And then guess what? The chances of you getting what you want when you ask for it are so much higher than if you just never ask. So yeah, just a lot of like naming things, a lot of things being out in the open and not under, behind shadows, and yeah, a lot of trusting and safety.
Thank you. The trusting makes me think of, again, paraphrasing, a bird does not trust the branch that it is resting on. It trusts its ability to fly if the branch breaks. And so, yeah, like authentic relating in this connection, it is a practice. And I said last night, I noticed that it was just easier for these things to flow out of me. I also noticed that in my one group, somebody was not reflecting, they were processing and like asking me questions. But I trusted in myself to say, you know what, I would like to just stick to the exercise, which is to reflect. So I'll say, thank you for your reflections. And like the practice is, for me, is building that trust in myself to like know what I need, to recognize that this need to be heard feels good. And to receive reflections feels good. To receive unwanted feedback does not. And so I trust that I feel that, I'm present with it. This is authentically what's happening in the moment. And I have the skill set to say, this is not what I need right now. That practice, I think it reminds me of mindfulness and meditation. And it's the same thing of like being present in relationships. I think of like authentic relating as mindful connection, mindful relationship.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
I use that analogy a lot. Like it's like a meditation of connection. Like instead of focusing on our breath and returning to our breath, it's like, how can we like return to what's actually happening here with us? So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'm also feeling super curious who that was in the workshop that was, and you don't have to answer there, but I'm just like noticing, I'm like, ooh.
The person without a camera.
Yeah, that was my assumption.
Yeah. And it happened with the other participant as well. Like she did it with the other participant, but the other participant was not as practiced and maybe not trusting herself as much to say like, hey, thank you. With me, it felt a little more aggressive, but that could be me taking it personally.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to that too, because it's not only the awareness of like noticing your own impact, like the impact of that interaction, right? Oh, like that doesn't feel good, or whatever it brings up. But then it's also the like communicating it in a way that's actually safe, or that feels like effective, as opposed to just like, stop, what are you doing? Or I don't want to, but like, yeah, that's there's like multiple layers of that interaction, where my guess is that, I mean, this is just an assumption, that the intention of that person was to, try to do the exercise, or to try to be supportive in some way, and yet it wasn't feeling good.
Yeah. It's interesting, our society, and I've talked a lot about this with folks lately, but the desire to help, everybody wants to help and wants to be a helper and fixer and a problem solver. And the fable, I think, is something about like, give a man a hammer and he's always looking for something to hammer. I used to identify as a problem solver. So I saw everything as a problem for me to solve. If you're a fixer or a helper, you see everything as something that needs to be helped. And it's an interesting thing that's playing out in society, and particularly in this world of self-help and self-discovery and building connection and relating to each other and understanding that we're interconnected, but like how to do that with what in the law of one is called free will. Like everybody has free will to choose what they want to do. And we so much, our society more so like wants us each to respond to, I'm gonna back that up. How do I want to say this? Yeah, we seem to be in a society that tries to manipulate everybody to our needs. And I think that in helping, like, it's part of that. Like I questioned somebody the other day. I'm like, I'm grateful for your desire to help, but did you ask me if I needed help? Or are you trying to meet your need to be a helper? And the being able,
comes up a lot for me in my relationship as I am partnered with a helper. And yeah, it's like as you were describing that, I was picturing the countless times where I'll be doing something like cooking dinner or something, and he'll just come in and start doing something, and I'm like, wait a minute, like I actually didn't ask for help, and it now feels unhelpful. But yeah, there's like this. This actually reminds me of another kind of foundation of authentic relating, or at least a concept, is like understanding our why. Like what is the why for, like, and a lot of it has to do with like conversation, or like what we're sharing. Why am I sharing this? Like what is it, what is the motivation behind what I'm about to say to you? Is it to be in connection, or is it to, I want some kind of, like, I want you to think of me a certain way? And like the helper thing is kind of part of that, right? If I do this or say this, will I be viewed as helpful and needed and worthy, maybe, is underneath that. But yeah, ultimately, like what is our why? Like, oh, I'm going to share something really personal with you. What's my why? Is it because I'm like thinking that that's going to get me somewhere? Or is it, that I'm wanting to reveal that part of me to you? Or is it a manipulation?
I'm curious with that, how do you, I'll say, use the word recommend, cultivate, like when interacting with people who have not ever asked themselves why, like how do you begin to navigate that? Manage is not the right word, but navigate.
Well, I think it has to do with an internal dialogue. Like if we can kind of start to notice our own why, like that's really the first part of it, I would think. Like there's actually a fun game within authentic relating where we, rather than saying the thing that we would normally say, we actually kind of, oh, right now this is what I would do. So we're not actually like saying it, like as opposed to saying, right now I'd say, how are you, Sherwood? It would be, right now I would ask you kind of like a basic question, you know, to feel you out. And then the game is followed up by, one or two layers of like, why, like what's your why for that? Like why was I going to ask how you are? Because I really care about how you're doing. Like I haven't talked to you in a while and I really feel like I want to feel closer to you. Or is it, I have nothing better to say and I'm filling the space? I mean, because for some people that, in some moments that is the real why. But what's underneath that why? Oh, well, because I'm uncomfortable with silence. I'm afraid that, something scary will happen. So there's actually like something really rich underneath the surface of our whys, like when we really start to kind of dig into that. So that can be a really fun game to play with people who are willing to kind of explore that. Like instead of saying the thing that you're going to say, kind of exploring, wait, what was I about to do and why is that? And Yeah, so I think self-inquiry is kind of like a first step for that.
Thank you. Uh, it is an ongoing saga in my life, of my own self-inquiry. And it's interesting because as I communicate with someone in my life, there's a lot of times that I'm asking, what's the why? Why are you sharing this with me? What's the intention, motivation behind this? So that we can get to the meat, the root, the juiciness of it. And I don't get a response often. Even in a verbal communication, it's, I don't know. And so it's been a beautiful mirroring exercise for me to then continue the self exploration of like, well, what's my why? Why am I continuing this? Why am I continuing to feed or nurture this pattern? What am I, what's my intention? Like, to be enough in something, to be seen, to be heard.
So you're talking about like situations where you're wanting to understand someone else's why, and then they're kind of like, I don't know, and not really able. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's tricky because if somebody doesn't have that insight on their own, it's like it's not like something we can force in one another. Um, what comes up for me as when I picture myself in that situation, I feel like I would um, end up sharing impact. Like if someone's doing something and I want to know their why, my guess is that something that they just said or did has an impact, and that's why I'm like, wait, why? What had you just saying that, or what had you ask that or do that or whatever? And so yeah, I think what my go-to would be is to share impact, like what's there because of that action, or um, and that's not to say that that's like the answer to like, oh, now they're going to know their why, but I mean that's my truth, right? Is saying like, wow, hearing you say that, I'm noticing feeling angry or like annoyed or whatever, the situation is. And that's my truth. It's like indisputable, which, regardless of whether they can figure out their why, um, what's alive for me is what's alive for me.
Yeah. Thank you. Both on a personal level and the because this is like real world practice, not everybody's going to sign up for an authentic relating class. Not everybody's going to be in that space to learn. So like, how do we navigate as we go out and interact in the world? I know myself, I keep going back to the why, and I keep questioning my why. Why am I, and not necessarily sharing the impact. And I do think that sharing that impact, being real, being authentic in that, shining my light as it is, does create change. Minute, small, it might just be a small little crack in an eggshell, but that crack might let some light in.
Yeah, when we know each other's truth, when like, so for instance, I'm saying this in relation to you sharing impacts, like when I know your truth, then I can make a more educated decision on how I want to proceed. The other option is I might be assuming how you're feeling or what the impact is. So yeah, that like I really do have this kind of fantasy of if all of us were really speaking our truth and even our desires, right? Like I might want something that involves you, and it's like if I don't actually speak it, then you don't get to like, you know, appropriately assess what you're okay with and not okay with. So it's like in a world where everyone's actually doing that, everyone's in touch with what they need and want and communicating it, then we can all really navigate it. Like, sure, would I want to come over and make myself dinner at your house? That doesn't feel like a fit for me. now it's like you get to say, oh, this is what she wants. How do I feel about that? It's not a fit, or yeah, that would be, and so we get to like navigate from this place of like what's actually here. And I think once, like, what comes up for me as kind of like a why someone wouldn't want to do that is like, what if I get disappointed, or what if they say no, and that's part of the experience of being human, is that disappointment is inevitable at times, just like sadness and grief and other challenging feelings. Like, so the more we can be comfortable with those feelings, the more courageous we can become to like putting ourselves out there and saying like, Sherwood, I'm going to come over and make myself dinner. And you might say no, and I can handle it if you say no and I feel disappointed, or if I feel like heartbroken, or like, how could he say no, like rejected, or whatever comes up for me. If I know I can handle that, then that actually fuels me to be even more courageous in how I share authentically.
Um, that sounds like going back to the trusting myself that I can speak my needs, I can receive what's being, what somebody else's experience is without making it my own.
Well, it's like the bird analogy too. Like, if a bird was basing their choice to land on a branch on like how strong the branches are, they might never land because they're like, how can I really prove that any of these branches will hold me? But the trust isn't in the branch. The trust is in, I can fly away. I know how to handle this if the branch breaks. And like, yeah, so I'm going to go try to land on that branch. Oh, that one didn't work. And so I proved to myself I can handle it, and went to the next one that could handle it. And so yeah, that's kind of what life is, right? It's not about trusting that the branch will hold us. It's about trusting that we can handle what the impact is of the branch breaking.
Mm, yeah, it's interesting. Like, just in my head, we as a society seem to want to trust everyone. Like, trust is out there, love is out there, peace is out, everything else is out there,
The blame is also out there
blame
too.
is out, yeah, but everything really is in here. It, like, you radiate love, you radiate trust, you radiate peace, or you radiate anger, and you radiate fear, and you radiate lack. Whatever it is, you're radiating it. Just before this call, as I'm working on a meditation, you might have heard of like the mountain meditation or lake meditation. Like mountain, you imagine that you're a mountain, and the seasons come and go, and things are there. Sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's raining, but you're just a mountain. All of these emotions and stuff. Lake is the same thing. The water's choppy. There's things move. Just different analogy. So I'm working on one about the sun and the solar system, and like, because the sun just is there and it radiates, and like, what are you radiating? What is the energy that's moving out there? And everything in the solar system is, impacted by what you're doing, but they just keep on doing their thing. And some of them you create life, some of them, like, it doesn't create life. And just being in your energy.
Yeah, I like those analogies for practicing being with whatever is, like the seasons and the things that'll ripple, and it's like, and you're still a mountain, or you're still a lake, or yeah, I
Yeah.
like that.
So we have a few moments left. I want to see if there's anything you want to share in reflection, wrap up, any curiosities. If there was one thing you wanted the world to know.
There's a lot of things I want them to know. The thing that just came up for me was like, just kind of an invitation for anyone that's listening is to just notice the impact that happens in our interactions day to day. Like, and you don't even have to put a voice to them, although I mean that's like level 2 invitation. But yeah, like noticing in connection and in relationship, like what feelings come up in different situations. Someone says hi to you when you walk in the room. What's the impact? Somebody doesn't say hi to you when you walk in the room. What's the impact? Just kind of taking a mental note of that stuff. It can be really interesting to observe.
Thank you. Yeah. Noticing our experience is a huge step one